Hi, this is Frederick Buskey from Strategic Leadership Consulting. This video builds on content that was published in my blog on March 30th, 2020. You can find that blog post on my website, frederickbuskey.com/blog. This material builds on the blog, so please make sure you check out that content before watching the video. I think that'll help it make a lot more sense to you. If you find what's in this video to be valuable to you, I hope you subscribe. There should be a link in the lower right hand corner, and that'll stay on throughout the video. So at some point, if you think, hey, this is good stuff and you want to subscribe, please go ahead and do that. All right, so what is this video and why am I doing it now? So I'm really committed to the idea of helping leaders get off the treadmill of the urgent and learn to take strategic actions on a daily basis. So that's my usual thing. That's what most of my content focuses on. That's what my coaching and my training involves. But I'm filming this in late March 2020, and we're in the midst of the coronavirus. And so things aren't normal. And I've seen a lot of our leaders now are working from home, and it's a really big shift for people. We've been in crisis mode for about 2 weeks now. So I'm putting together this series of content and videos to help people kind of transition to the new normal. Because one of my concerns is that in leading from home, we lose a lot of our routines, we lose a lot of our structure, and we wind up engaging in a lot of patterns of behavior that really are unhealthy for us as leaders. So it's a critical time. Most leaders are focused on taking care of everybody else but themselves. So I thought it's really important at this time to do a series of content and video casts on helping leaders lead healthily from home. So where does my knowledge come from? So I've got over 30 years of experience in education and leadership development, but the last 16 years I have done a lot of working from home. And during that time, I was raising 4 kids. Most of them are out now, but there's going to be 3 working adults in my household right now. Of course, we're all pretty much on lockdown, so we still have that, but I don't have the young kids now, but I have had. And yeah, I think also I build on my own experiences, but also on the experiences of others. I work with a lot of leaders. I talk to a lot of leaders. I listen. So I'm bringing other people's perspectives into this as well. And then I've read a lot of research. So try to marry those 3 things: a personal experience, other people's experience, and research, and come up with something that's powerful and meaningful and hopefully will help you. So there's 3 big things. If you take nothing away from this entire series, there are 3 really fundamental ideas that I hope you will walk away with. Number 1 is to be intentional. Whatever you decide to do, if you don't take any of the ideas that you hear in this video, you don't like any of it, it's not going to work for you, that's fine. But be intentional in making those decisions. Right now, because of we're in crisis mode and we've made all these changes and we've been reactive. And the way to be proactive is to begin by being intentional. So this series is really meant to help you as a leader examine how you've made this transition, and then how you can make your leading from home a better experience for you. And then ultimately that helps the people you serve as well. So be intentional is so, so important. Number 2 is learning to limit distractions and to limit transitions. Every time you have a distraction, every time you change from one task to another, you're going to lose productivity. And there's always this little kind of cognitive load that happens that takes a toll on you. So if you have to do 50 transitions, 100 transitions in a day, each one of those takes a little bit of energy and diminishes your ability to focus and do meaningful work. So we really want to limit those distractions and limit transitions. And that's a lot of what this series will focus on. And then the other piece is to engage fully, which means engaging healthily. So this goes along with that idea of distractions. It also attacks the kind of falsehood of thinking that we're all good at multitasking. One of the things I'll really encourage you to do throughout this series is to be fully engaged in one thing, and then if you need to deal with something else, to step out of that, deal with that, and be fully engaged in that. So if you walk away with only 3 things: be intentional, limit distractions and transitions, and then engage fully and healthily. So there may be some things in here that don't apply to you. As I said, I've raised kids before, but I don't have them in the house right now. So if you've got kids, you may have to make some adjustments to some of the things that, the ideas that I share out with you. Also, if you're someone who collaborates with people across different time zones, that's another adjustment that you'll have to make on this whole thing. So I've made a couple assumptions here and I want to share those with you. First, that you've read the content. Again, I emailed that out to people. It's also on my blog from March 30th, 2020. So don't go any further without reading the content. I'm also assuming that we're starting to move from crisis mode into this kind of new normal, and I keep referring to leading at home. So I'm assuming that you're making that transition. The crisis stuff is starting to settle down, which means now's the time that you can focus on your routines. I guess I should insert here too. This is meant to be a 5-part content and video series. So on Monday, March 30th, we're going to focus on routines, and that's what this is. On Tuesday, we're going to be doing your spaces. On Wednesday, we're covering renewal. On Thursday, we're covering healthy practices, healthy leadership practices. And then on Friday, we're going to deal with communications, which should be really fun. All right. Crisis is the new normal, or we're in the new normal. The third assumption I'm making is that focus is essential, and that relates to kind of 3 ideas. Number one, as a leader, you should have things that you're focused on that you need to be really productive. So it's not just this idea of going out and putting out fires, but if you're acting strategically, that kind of thing takes focus for you to be productive. Also, when you're in that high productive zone, that helps you get into flow state. And flow state is something that brings us a lot of joy, a lot of satisfaction, and really can add energy to us. So achieving flow state as a leader by working on priority tasks is really critical, and I think it's something that we lack in our normal work environments, and it's going to be even harder to achieve when we're leading from home. And then the final reason that focus is essential is because it helps maintain your health. The other assumption I've made is that morning is your peak productive time. And I did that because that's my peak productive time. If I'm going to produce content and it's going to be high quality, I've got to do that in the morning because I can't write nearly as well in the afternoon. If you're someone who works better in the afternoon, then just flop out when I'm talking about morning. Just go ahead and make that switch. All right, so I'm going to take a little bit of an applied approach because again, we're building on content that you've already read. So I'm going to provide some examples and kind of walk you through some of my routines. We talked about 4 time blocks, right? So there's a transition to work, a morning time block, an afternoon time block, and then the transition from work. Some of you may actually have 3 different time blocks. So you may have your morning, your afternoon, and then evening. That might especially be true if you have kids at home. So you get them settled in, get them to bed, and then you've got a third work period in the evening. So go ahead and make those transitions, make those changes as you need as I describe my things here. So let's talk about that transition to work. The purpose on that really is to get your brain ready as well as your emotions ready to focus on work. You may be busy taking care of your personal needs, but also taking care of the needs of others. And so that transition period is a time for you to take care of them and all that other stuff, but then also to start to create that hard stop between everything that's happening outside and then your personal life and then stepping into your professional life. So I want to emphasize 2 pieces of that. One is that you really need to put a hard stop to the news. We all know there's a lot of stuff going on, things are changing rapidly, but if you try to keep up on everything that's going on, you're going to keep yourself distracted, you're going to keep yourself stressed, and it's not productive and it's not healthy. So put a hard stop to your news when you transition to work in the morning and the news and all that stuff. You also want to incorporate some kind of self-care in the morning, because if you take care of yourself after you take care of everybody else right before you go into work, since we're working from home, if you do something for yourself and center yourself, that's going to help you be much more productive, much more focused. If you take 5, 10, 15 minutes out to pray, to read, to meditate, whatever it is, you take that time, 5 to 15 minutes to take care of yourself, and then you transition right from there into your work, you're going to be so much more productive. You will get all of that time back in productivity, but you'll also feel better. So what does my morning routine look like? The first thing I do is check my calendar and see if there are any special events or things that I need to be mindful of or aware of that are going to impact the different time blocks in my day. So there are two ways to schedule your day, and usually I think we're going to wind up doing some kind of hybrid variation, but you can schedule your day very tightly by specific tasks. So if you know you have a specific report that you need to work on, you can plug in time to work on that. Of course, meetings you're going to drop in. If you have something that's going to span a couple days, you may block specific amounts of time across your calendar throughout the week for that. So you can do this really kind of tight scheduling so that you know everything that you need to be working on at a specific time. The other way to do it is to approach it by time blocks, which is more the pattern I work on. So what I'll do is I know that I take a big creative content development time. So I'll block 2 hours, maybe 3 hours, depending on what I'm working on. And I just take that big block and I drop it into my day. I know I may switch that a little bit, massage it depending on what happens. And this time block doesn't necessarily tell me whether I'm working on my book or I'm working on a podcast or whatever it is. But it's a placeholder, right? So think about what might work for you in terms of helping you be productive is scheduling time block, or if you want to schedule things really tightly. But anyway, that's part of my calendar, so I look at that. I then think about what my priority tasks are. And so we've already talked a little bit about this idea of peak productivity. And for me, that's the morning. So once I take care of these morning basics, that's when I'm primed to do my best work. So the most important thing for the day should get done right there in the morning. And for me, those are always strategic things. And again, when I preach getting off the treadmill of the urgent, that peak productivity time should be time that you're operating in quadrant 2, which is being proactive and working on things to develop in the future. So those big ideas, reflection, figuring out what next steps are to something that's pretty complicated, all those things are things that should be done during your peak productivity time. I try to push communications to later. That's really hard. Probably like you, I have some bad habits around communication, especially around email. But I do turn off most of my notifications while I'm trying to get into that peak productivity time, because that's also the time that we get into that whole flow state. So usually coming out of that, I feel really good, and I don't want to be interrupted during our peak productivity time. So try to push communications to later. That's going to vary depending on your situation. And again, on Friday, so that'll be the 5th video in this series, we'll take a deep dive onto communications. I also want to talk about triggers, because one of the things I talk about in the content piece is that routines are like lining up dominoes. So you have routine 1, which leads to routine 2, which leads to 3 to 4, and on down. And if you do a really good job in the beginning, you're more likely to hit more dominoes and stick with more of your routines. Because when we start getting out of routine, then we're back in that reactive phase and we're being less productive. So an important part of routines is triggers. And so there are a couple different kinds of triggers that I think that I use and that might be good for you. One, of course, is the obvious one of ending. So when I end something and I finish a specific task, that's a trigger for me to move to the next thing. So when I finish looking at my calendar in the morning, that's a trigger for me to look at what are my priority pieces. And then once I finish with the priority piece, that's a trigger to then go to the actual piece of priority work that I'm going to do. So ending something is a good trigger. I use my calendar as a trigger too. So the one set of alerts that I actually keep active on my computer while I'm working is my calendar. So when I get those notifications that pop up, those trigger me to go into the next thing. Those are also helpful if I get off task, which happens. I get distracted and I think, oh, I forgot to order the cat food. So I jump onto my Amazon account, and you know how that goes. then I get that calendar notification pop up, and that helps me like, oh, okay, I got to get back into my dominoes. I got to get back into my routines. And another thing that you can use is food and drink. So when I finish my morning coffee, that becomes my trigger then to make a transition and go do something else. When I finish that second or third glass of water, or I finish my priority work and then I go get my morning snack, or maybe I eat breakfast then. So food and drink can be good for transitions. Also, as we've already talked about, we really want to limit interruptions and transitions to the greatest degree possible. And when we're in the home environment, those things are going to come from communications, right? Which is either people trying to reach you or you trying to reach other people. But the other thing is just people and things that are happening inside the home. And so establishing routines for the other people that are in the house can be really important, whether those adults or kids. Like I said, we've got 3 people working in this household. Sometimes we're all on the computers and we're all doing stuff, but we're not all working at the same time. And so having those routines is really important. So one of the ones that we use that I think is really helpful is kind of this idea of knock, stop, and wait. So I have a home office. You can see I got a door behind me. And so our routine when somebody needs me is they knock on the door, they're going to step in, but then they're going to be quiet, right? And that knock signals me that somebody's coming in, so I don't get my big startle reflex, which is going to break my train of thought. I hear that knock, I know that they're there, but now I can finish my thought. I can finish talking, I can finish my little piece of content or whatever I need to do so that I don't totally lose that thread. So I finish that piece, and then because I'm done with it, I can turn away from my computer and I can focus on the person that's there in the room, right? So I think this is a great practice because I know they're there, I'm not ignoring them, but I get to finish my thought and I don't have to come back and figure out where I was. And that's good for my work, but it's also good for the other person because now I can let it go and I can turn and be 100% focused on them. What I don't want to do is be trying to type and talk to them at the same time because that's not doing justice to my content and it's certainly not doing justice to the person that's in the room with me. So one of the themes again going back is to be fully immersed in whatever you're doing. If that's creating something, if that's working with someone and you're on the phone, whatever that looks like, you should be fully immersed in it. If someone else comes in the room and they need you, then you need to finish this task, whatever that looks like, that finished piece, and then you need to go be with that person. All right, afternoon productivity. So for me, the afternoon's a little bit more disjointed. So that's when you see those domino chains, right? And they start to divide out and you get maybe 3 things going. And then sometimes they don't work anymore because what happens is stuff builds up that you hadn't anticipated. So somebody needs something or something happens, whatever it is. I find my afternoon productivity is lower. It's just, I assume it's more disjointed. And so to account for that, I choose to do tasks in the afternoon that are a little bit more mundane, that don't take as much brain power, it doesn't take as much focus. I do things that are shorter because that makes it easier to go from one thing to the next. If I'm getting the interruptions, it's easier to check off something small and then deal with the interruption. So that's the other thing also is I like to do check off items because when we check something off the list or we finish that email and we can delete it, we send it out, whatever it is, those are all kind of positive reinforcers to keep working. And that's what I need in the afternoon is those kind of positive things to keep me going. You may have a third time in the evening. So, that's going to influence what you do in these other periods. I think I want to talk to you now about transitioning from. So after your afternoon work period, you want to start to transition. You want to prep for the next day. If you know and you can lay out your day at the end of Monday, if you can lay out what the work is for Tuesday, and then step back, that helps you just leave it and hopefully to be able to step away from work, to relax a little bit more, and maybe to even sleep better. You really need to create hard boundaries between professional and personal. It's really hard when you're working from home because those environments just get so blended. And so building in routines, and then tomorrow we'll talk about structures that you can do to signal yourself and to signal others that work's over or work's beginning is really critical. So we want to think about creating boundaries. And when you transition at the end of the day, you want to close out whatever you need to close out in your work environment and your tasks and be done. It's really not healthy to carry your computer around and sit on the couch with your kids trying to do time with them, but then and have the TV on and then you're trying to answer email. Like that's just not healthy. It destroys your boundaries. It destroys your ability to be fully present with somebody, and it lowers the quality of your work and it wears you out. So I'm a big advocate for obviously for boundaries. I know there's some challenges here, especially around communications, and that's why we're going to do a whole deep dive on it on Friday. But I'll say my life is not your life, so the kinds of demands that come to me, the kinds of emergencies, the kinds of needs that other people have when they seek me out, those are different than yours. I get that. So you may not be able to use all the practices that I'm putting through here. But again, going back to that idea of being intentional, I want you to think about what will work for you and what won't work for you, and then be intentional about adopting it or not adopting it. I also want you to think about the urgent and important versus not important. So I talk a lot about the Eisenhower matrix, which is those 4 quadrants: urgent and important, not urgent but important, not urgent but not important, and then not urgent or not important. And what happens with leaders, especially in times like this, when we're out of our routines, is we're living in those 2 urgent quadrants, right? And urgent is where we're reactive. And sometimes we need to be there, right? If they just decided they're going to shut down the schools, whether you're one of those educators or you're a parent, whatever it is you're doing, like you're in crisis mode and you have to react. But we want to get out of the reactive mode as quick as we can and move into what I call quadrant 2, which is where you're dealing with important things that are not urgent, because that's where you really build your leadership. That's where you can support your people. That's where you grow your organization. So trying to be intentional about dealing with things that are important but not urgent versus just living that urgent zone is really critical. So we'll start to wind this video down by recapping best practices for routines. Number 1, be explicit with yourself about your routines and be explicit with others. So if I have a routine for transitioning from waking up to when I start my work, it's important for you to know what that routine is for you, but also let other people in the house know, right? So that everybody's aware of what every other person's routines are. Be consistent with your sequence. As soon as you get out of sequence, it's going to be much harder to stick with your plans for the day. Be intentional about if you need to break a routine, right? There's going to be things that happen and we're all going to break our routines. The key is to be intentional about it and to actually stop and think, wait a minute, this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing right now, and then make a decision, okay, this is an exception and I've got to go do this. Or, ooh, you know what, that was going to be a distraction. No, I've got to get back on my routine. So again, it's okay to break routine, but be intentional. Make it a decision, not a reaction. Build in triggers that signal a transition or remind you to get back on task. And do everything you can to limit interruptions in transitions. And we'll talk about some more strategies for doing that when we talk about spaces on Tuesday and communications on Friday. So I hope you found this content helpful to you. Be intentional about what you embrace. Be intentional about what you choose not to take on as your own. Please subscribe to my channel. That makes a big difference. It encourages me and helps me produce better content. The next video is spaces. Again, go to my blog. If you're not, or you can register for my email list, and those links are all in the show description. But also you can find the same content on my blog, which is frederickbuskey.com/blog. And so also Thursday, April 2nd, 2020, if you're watching this on time, at 2 o'clock on April 2nd of 2020, we're going to have a Zoom conference, and you have to register for that. but we'll kind of recap and unpack a lot of the ideas that we've explored this week. And that's open to leaders from all different kinds of sectors. So we'd love to see you there on Thursday, April 2nd. Also, I'd like to do a follow-up incorporating your feedback. So please comment and share. If you have questions, ask those. I'd love to hear your own experiences and how they're similar to or different from what I've presented here. And let me know what resonates with you and what doesn't. And then we can do a follow-up to that. So that would be beneficial, I think, for me and hopefully for you as well. You can learn more about my website at frederickbuskey.com. And please feel free to email me. My email is fbuskey, and that's Buskey. So fbuskey@gmail.com. All right, that's all for today. I'll see you again tomorrow. Do good and be well.